The Haunting of Oakwood Hall. I wake, wet with sweat, my heart hammering. My husband Joe sleeps like a babe beside me and doesn't stir. It's the third time this week I've woken from a dream, the same terrifying, heart-wrenching dream. We've been through a lot over the last 4 years, and I don't want to disturb his peace.
Save the children.
The voice echoes inside my head, half whispered like the last leaves falling in the silence of winter. Is it my own voice I hear, or one dreamt up in the labyrinth of my subconscious mind? It's cold, so very cold, and I pull the quilt more tightly around me, seeking comfort in the warmth. I've never been one for nightmares, even as a child. It's just since we moved to this old place, Oakwood Hall, 4 months ago. As soon as I walked through that old, heavy door, I could sense it. Sense her. It sounds ridiculous, I know, too ridiculous. But I know what I felt, the atmosphere thick and heavy, charged with unseen energy, like the air just before a storm. I shrugged it off at the time, laughed out loudly to frighten away any mischievous spirits and my own folly. I never mentioned it to Joe. He thinks I'm better, or at least better than I was. But now I know what it was, who it was. She was there, waiting for me in the shadows. Everything seems better in the daytime. Even the shadows that creep across the bedclothes disappear with the morning sun. Mary's already awake. I can hear her running around in the playroom just round the hallway. That's the reason we bought this rambling old house in the first place. Space is such a luxury with a young family, and we aim to have more. At least that was the idea when we married. After Mary's birth 4 years ago, I became ill. Not in the physical sense, but a disease of the mind, lacking that motherly bond with my own child, a mother's love. I could never tell my husband. The horrible numbness, bereft of all feeling, the chill upon my heart at seeing my own daughter. I stretch and yawn, turning my face towards the early morning light, just discerning the wish-wash glimmer of winter sun beyond the window.
Save the children.
For a moment, the whispered words echo around my head. There's no room for ghosts or daydreams, and pushing the thoughts aside, I quickly dress and go to Mary. I listen at the door before I enter, the soft whispers as Mary talks to her dolls. She should have brothers and sisters to play with, not just be an only child. It's all my fault. Yet the sight of my daughter never ceases to amaze me, to think that this carefree angel is of my flesh. Was I ever this happy? As I open the door to her room, she runs to me, grinning and chubby arms held wide to greet me. I go through the motions, pick her up and kiss her on the cheek with a heavy heart. Will I ever feel the true bond between mother and child? Later that afternoon, Mary's playing outside, all muffled up in her hat and scarf against the cold. I watch her through the kitchen window as I clear away the breakfast things. The garden's a safe haven, and Mary loves to dig around with a little plastic spade and bucket, digging up weeds and replanting them, only to dig them up once again. My mind starts to drift, imagining the garden full of children playing happily in the sunshine, when a movement in the bushes breaks my gaze. I feel cold, suddenly terribly cold, as my eye catches a dark shape next to the old oak tree. It's a figure, or that's the impression I get, a woman clothed in a long black dress. I see a face, a deathly white face staring back at me, eyes as black as night. I blink and she's gone. only the tree with its branches swaying in the breeze. Instinctively, I know it's her. Mary! I rush to the door in a panic, feeling light-headed. Mary! Her little form comes running at her name. Mummy, Algie picked these for you. Mary hands me a posy of ivy under the garden greenery. Algie is Mary's invisible friend. He arrived about the same time we moved to Oakwood. The doctor says it's perfectly normal at her age, being an only child, spending days playing on her own. I should try and do something about it, but she'll be going to school in less than a year. Then Algie will all be forgotten. I usher her inside, my head throbbing, and take one last look into the garden. The wintry sun is low, casting long dark shadows of trees across the lawn. It must have been the light playing tricks, the wind in the branches. I close the door quickly on the dimming afternoon. My headache lasts for the rest of the day. The tablets don't even touch it, and by the time Joe arrives back home from work, I'm like a bear with a sore head, and I snap at him as soon as he steps through the door. Hey, what's the matter, love? He says. He looks tired as he walks over to embrace me, but I turn away, cold to his warmth. I want to apologise, but the words won't come. Joe tries again, and I let his arms wrap around me, feel his energy. I want to tell him about what I saw today, but I remain silent. Perhaps I'm still unwell. For months after Mary was born, I saw things that nobody else could see. No sane person anyway. People long dead, not really ghosts, yet I saw their faces in the people that passed me by in the street. The doctor prescribed pills that put an end to the visions, but they emptied me out. I was like a shadow. It was no life. Gradually I weaned myself off the tablets, thought I was cured. But now, is it all starting again? Am I going mad? My thoughts turn to my daughter and her invisible friend. I'm worried about Mary, I whisper. Joe pulls away for a moment with a frown. Why? What's happened? He asks. It's this imaginary friend. What if she's mad? Like me? He cuts me off with a broad smile. You're not mad, love. You're doing fine. Algie? Oh, love, you had me worried there. Lots of kids have imaginary friends. She'll soon grow out of it. I don't feel convinced. I mean, how does a 4-year-old invent something like that? He gives me his bemused stare once again. Algie, he's a character in that video she watches all the time, The Little Princess. Don't say you haven't noticed. I think for a moment and then start to laugh until I can't stop. It's such a relief. Of course, Algie. That's where she gets the name from. I've been so silly, worrying. Later that night, I read Mary a bedtime story. She chooses one from her collection of Little Princess books. As we turn the pages, I point to one of the illustrations and decide to humour her. Look, Mary, it's Algie, your friend. She turns and gives me a bemused look that reminds me of her father. That's not Algie, Mummy. He doesn't look like that at all, silly. She giggles and scrunches up her nose. Well, what does Algie look like then? I ask. She laughs again. Oh, Mummy, can't you see him? He sat on the bed listening to the story. She goes on to describe the imaginary boy sat at the foot of her bed as a sudden chill envelops me. In her own childlike way, she describes a young boy wearing a blue suit, short trousers and a jacket with a bow at the neck, long stockings and lace-up boots. I don't sleep that night. There's a storm on the way and the trees rattle and tap against the window pane like some unquiet spirit trying to gain entry. I get out of bed, despite the cold of the room, and walk to the window. The moon is high, casting the garden with an eerie luminescence. The dark trees and bushes writhe against the oncoming storm's torment, twisting in agony. And then my heart freezes as I see two dark shapes, a woman and a small boy, turning their white, pale, almost translucent faces blankly up towards me. No! I scream into the darkness as a light flicks on and Joe is at my side and I fall into his arms. It's okay, love. You were sleepwalking, that's all. You must have had a bad dream. It's okay. It's okay. The next day I wake alone. Joe has an early start and I listen a moment to the sounds of morning. After the storm last night, all seems eerily quiet. The storm last night. An image of those two pale faces staring up at me. Was it a dream? I need to get out of this house, leave the shadows and ghosts of Oakwood Hall and feel the fresh Northumberland breeze in my hair. After a hurried breakfast, I bundle Mary into the car and drive quickly away from the old stone walls. The sun is dazzlingly bright, the sky azure. It could be the middle of July if it wasn't for the leafless trees standing stark against the skyline. There's damage already from last night's storm, limbs torn from trees and hedgerows as we pass. I switch on the radio to try and bring some cheer, but instead I hear the local weatherman warning of more bad weather to come. It's hard to imagine on a day like today. The calm before the storm, perhaps? I switch off the chattering and we drive on in silence, Mary lulled into sleep as I drive to nowhere in particular. I've done little to acquaint myself with the local area. I drive past signs for Heading on the Wall, Ponteland, East Wall Houses and Matfern Village. I'm not interested in destinations, just driving. I think I'm heading straight in one direction, but the twisty Northumberland roads are deceiving, and I pass another sign for Matfern Village. I turn the opposite way, but 5 minutes later I pass another sign for Matfern. A small chill passes over my heart, and I shiver involuntarily. Do all roads lead to Matfern? This is silly. Maybe I need some fresh air, stretch my legs. I turn the car, and after about a minute I see a sign for Matfern Hall. Matfern Hall. Something stirs inside my head like an old forgotten melody, but I shake away the feeling. The hall looms ahead, and I see it's now a hotel and health spa. I almost turn around again, yet something keeps me driving onwards and into the car park. Now I'm here, I may as well take a good look around. Perhaps I could visit the health spa, might do me some good. Stepping out of the car, I pull my coat tightly around me. The sun is merely for decoration today, and the air is bitingly cold. I shake Mary gently awake, not wanting to disturb her peaceful dreams. And putting on her hat and gloves, we step around to the front of the hall. The place is impressive, grand. I'm aware of the dark shapes of birds high in the trees that line the driveway as I stare up at the magnificent bayed front, and an overwhelming feeling of sadness wells up inside me. I feel Mary's tiny hand inside my own and squeeze it tightly. There is something here, something dark, terrible. As the mood changes, so does the weather. The wind suddenly whipping up around us, grey clouds gathering across the face of the sun. I stare up at the great stone edifice, dark mullioned windows reflecting the changing skies. All empty, all except one, where a pale blank face stares down at me. For a moment I cannot move, fixed to the spot by some unearthly tie. The face is ghastly, white, a pitiful vision of sorrow. I'm aware of everything around me, feel Mary's hand leave mine as she runs, giggling towards the trees that line the driveway. I stand helpless, my eyes fixed on the vision in front of me as the wind whips up all around. I'm conscious of the storm brewing, the trees shaking, a sudden squall causing a murmuration of rooks to rise and fall above me in black, screeching waves. I close my eyes, shutting out the face at the window, and the noise intensifies. Above the birds cackling I hear another sound, the approaching of a horse and cart. I open my eyes, the sound so near I fear being run into, but there's nothing. Mummy! I turn toward Mary as an almighty crack sounds through the air. I can see a small boy standing next to her, smiling, when all I can do is watch as a branch is wrenched free from its trunk above her head and starts to fall. Mary! I scream, and yet no sound comes. Instead, the sound of the cart fills my head, a horse whinnying and then a woman screaming. I feel faint, my head spinning. I come to, propped on a plush sofa in what can only be the entrance lobby of Matfern Hall. A woman is smiling down at me. How are you feeling? She asks. My head feels thick, but I've only one thought in my head. Mary. The woman smiles and turns her head forward. I follow her gaze and there's Mary sat opposite, swinging her chubby little legs. Mummy, you fainted. She runs into my arms and I can't stop the tears from flowing. For once my heart is full of motherly love. But what about the tree, the branch? Everything seems so muddled. The woman looks confused for a moment. Oh yes, the storm. A few trees have been damaged, she adds. But Mary, I saw the branch, it was falling on her. The woman shakes her head. Mary's fine. She was playing near the doorway, or at least she was when I heard you calling out. Mary giggles in my arms. It was Algy, Mummy. I was playing with Algy. His mummy came and was taking me inside. She seemed ever so sad. I never mentioned the incident to Joe. What could I say without sounding like a madwoman? Besides, after that day, I was filled with a kind of peace. Even Oakwood Hall seemed different, the air lighter, free of the past. I never saw the woman again. Never knew if it was all in my imagination. That is until now, when repairs started on the old place, and under part of one of the old floorboards, one of the builders found an old newspaper. He gave it to Joe, who passed it on to me. Hey, look what's been found. I thought you might be interested. I take the yellowing paper, the Newcastle Daily Chronicle, dated Thursday the October 1st, 1863. I can feel my heart chill as I read the following. Fatal accident to Mrs. Blackett of Wylam. A feeling of the deepest sorrow was caused in Wylam and the neighbourhood on Tuesday by the intelligence that Mrs. Blackett, the wife of Captain E.A. Blackett of Wylam, Oakwood, had been killed by a fall from her carriage. Mrs. Blackett, being a good driver, frequently drove out without attendants or any company, and on Tuesday, she, accompanied by two of her children, drove from Oakwood to Matfern Hall, the residence of Sir E.A. Blackett, about 10 miles distant. Mrs. Blackett and the children took luncheon at Matfern, and afterwards entered the carriage, intending to drive home by the way of Stamfordham, where Mrs. Blackett purposed to make a call. Scarcely had she taken their seats when the horse, a spirited bay of rather high breeding, became restive. Mrs. Blackett requested the children get out of the carriage while she endeavoured to either conquer or calm the vicious brute. They did so, but the horse continued to rear and plunge on the road, through the shrubbery, and at last the carriage upset, and Mrs. Blackett was thrown with some violence to the ground. The gardener, who was at some distance, hastened to the assistance of the unfortunate lady and carried her to the house. But her head had been so severely injured that in a very few minutes after her removal to the entrance hall of the mansion, Mrs. Blackett ceased to breathe. A family consisting of 7 young children is left to deplore the loss of a most affectionate and estimable parent. I read no more and allow the paper to slip from my hand and onto the floor. Interested to know more, I search the internet for further details of Mrs. Lucy Blackett of Oakwood, Wylam. I find the family tree on an ancestry website, all 7 children listed. At the bottom of the list, one name particularly catches my eye: Algernon Minchin Blackett, 1862 to 1866, only 1 year old when his mother was so tragically killed, and only 4 years when he joined her. He was affectionately known to his family as Little Algie. A week later, I stand in the grounds of St. Mary the Virgin, Ovingham's graveyard, and the final resting place of Lucy and Algernon Blackett. Laying down a small wreath of flowers against a stone, erected in their memory, I give up a small prayer of thanks to Lucy for saving my daughter, but also for saving me. May they rest in peace. The end.